Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Easy English Spark. I'm so glad you're here today. We're about to dive into an exciting adventure that'll help boost your English listening and speaking skills. Get ready to enhance your confidence and fluency as we follow Evelyn Mercer on her quest to uncover a hidden treasure and a dangerous secret. Let's spark up your English journey and have some fun along the way. Let's get started. Chapter 1. A Mysterious Visitor. London. A cold winter afternoon. The wind howled through the empty streets, carrying a sense of gloom and stillness. Inside our apartment at 221B Baker Street, I, Dr. Edward Carter, sat by the fireplace, flipping through the pages of a book. The room was quiet, except for the soft crackling of burning wood and the rustling of paper as I turned each page. Across the room, Theodore Hawthorne, my closest friend, and the man I admired most, stood silently by the window. He was different today, unlike his usual energetic and sharp-witted self. His hands were tucked into his coat pockets, and he gazed out at the fog-covered streets with an expression of boredom. I set my book down and looked at him with concern. "What's wrong, Theodore? You seem different today," he sighed, his voice carrying a note of frustration. "Edward, don't you find London incredibly dull today? No cases, no mysteries, nothing interesting at all. I was born to solve riddles, but today is painfully uneventful." I chuckled and shook my head. "You can't always expect a thrilling mystery to land on your doorstep, my friend. Sometimes you should just enjoy a quiet day." But Theodore didn't respond. Instead, he sighed once more and turned away from the window. Just then there was a sharp knock at the door, urgent and insistent. We exchanged glances. The dullness of the day vanished in an instant. I heard the hurried footsteps of Mrs. Hudson, our housekeeper, as she moved to answer the door. Moments later, she entered the room, carrying a silver tray. On it lay a small white card. Carefully, she placed the tray on the table and spoke. "Young lady wishes to see you both. She seems quite distressed." Theodore picked up the card, his eyes narrowing as he read aloud. "Miss Evelyn Mercer. I don't recognize the name." He looked at me, and I saw a familiar spark in his eyes. The look of a man who had just found a puzzle worth solving. Turning to Mrs. Hudson, he nodded. "Please, send her in." A few minutes later, Miss Evelyn Mercer entered the room. She was a young woman, perhaps 25 years old, with golden hair and deep blue eyes. Though she wore a simple dress, not the kind adorned by the fashionable elite, there was an undeniable elegance and intelligence in her demeanor. However, what struck me most was the fear etched across her delicate features. Her hands clutched her handbag tightly, and though she tried to remain composed, I noticed the slight tremble of her lips. Theodore gestured for her to take a seat opposite him. His voice was calm, yet reassuringly firm. "Miss Mercer, please relax. I am Theodore Hawthorne, and this is Dr. Edward Carter, my trusted associate. You may tell us everything. What brings you here on such a winter evening?" Evelyn took a deep breath and gently placed her handbag on her lap. She looked at Theodore, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and anxiety. Mr. Hawthorne, I am not a wealthy woman, nor do I come from a powerful family. But I have heard of your reputation, that you help both the rich and the poor alike. I pray that you can help me too. Theodore nodded, his voice even and measured. I am only interested in one thing, whether your story is truly intriguing. So, Miss Mercer, tell me, what has happened? Evelyn lowered her gaze, unfastened her handbag, and carefully took out a small box. She opened it slowly, revealing a single, lustrous pearl inside. I leaned forward slightly, watching the pearl glisten under the dim lamp. For the past 4 years, Evelyn began, I have received one pearl like this, every year, without fail. There was never a name, never a letter, just a pearl in a small box like this. She paused, then reached into her handbag again and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She handed it to Theodore, who took it with curiosity and began to read aloud. London, November 17th. Miss Mercer, tonight at 7:00 p.m., stand outside Victoria Theatre, by the left entrance. If you are afraid, bring 2 trustworthy friends. Do not involve the police. You have been deceived, but tonight you will learn the truth. Your unknown friend. A heavy silence filled the room. I looked at Evelyn. Her hands were trembling. Mr. Hawthorne, she pleaded, her voice tinged with desperation. I do not understand what this letter means, but I feel that it is something of great importance. I am afraid. I do not know whether I should go or not. Theodore placed the letter down on the table and crossed his arms, studying her intently. For a moment he said nothing. Then, slowly, a small smile of intrigue spread across his face, the kind of smile he wore when a riddle had caught his full attention. Miss Mercer, we shall accompany you tonight. I have a feeling this is no mere prank. I nodded in agreement, a thrill of anticipation building inside me. A new case had begun, and I knew, when Theodore Hawthorne was on the trail, no mystery would remain unsolved. Chapter 2: The Vanishing Captain. The room was silent, except for the faint crackling of the fireplace. Miss Evelyn Mercer sat in front of us, her hands gently resting on her lap. Though she had gathered the courage to visit us, I could still see the unease in her deep blue eyes. Theodore Hawthorne, sitting opposite her, leaned forward slightly. His keen eyes studied her, as if he could already sense the mystery unraveling before her lips even moved. Miss Mercer, Theodore said in a calm, composed voice, I need you to tell us everything from the beginning. Every detail, no matter how small, could be important. Evelyn took a deep breath, steadying herself before she began. It all started 10 years ago, she said softly. I was 17 at the time, and I had not seen my father for years. I adjusted myself in my chair, listening intently. My father, Captain Leonard Mercer, was a military officer stationed in India, she continued. He left for his assignment when I was just a child, and I barely had any memories of him. My mother passed away when I was very young, so I was raised by governesses and sent to boarding school. She paused for a moment, lost in thought. then continued. Then, one day, I received a letter from my father. He told me that he had completed his service in India and was finally returning home. He said he could not wait to see me and that he had something important to tell me. I noticed the way her hands clenched slightly as she recalled that moment. In the letter, he gave me the name of the hotel where he was staying, the Rosewood Hotel in London. He asked me to meet him there the day after he arrived. Theodore nodded, his expression unreadable. So I traveled to London, eager to see my father again after so many years. I arrived at the hotel early in the afternoon, carrying nothing but excitement in my heart. But when I asked for Captain Mercer at the front desk, the manager gave me a puzzled look. Evelyn hesitated before speaking the next words, as if they still troubled her deeply. He told me that my father had gone out the previous evening and had never returned. A chill ran down my spine. Never returned? I repeated. She nodded. Yes. His belongings were still in his room, his luggage, his books, even his uniform. It was as if he had simply stepped out for a walk and vanished into thin air. And you're certain he had already arrived in London? Theodore asked. Yes, she replied. His name was in the hotel's registry. The staff remembered him arriving and checking into his room. But after that evening, nothing. Theodore drummed his fingers on the armrest of his chair, deep in thought. What did you do next? At first, I thought he had been delayed or had fallen ill somewhere, Evelyn admitted. I waited for hours, then through the night, expecting him to return. But he never did. By the next morning, I was terrified. She swallowed hard before continuing. I went to the police. They conducted a search, published notices in newspapers, and questioned witnesses. But no one knew where he had gone. It was as if he had simply disappeared. Theodore's voice was measured. Were there any signs of a struggle in his room? Anything missing? No. Evelyn shook her head. His room was untouched. The only thing that seemed out of place was a note I found tucked inside one of his books. It had just 4 words. The mark of 4. Theodore's gaze sharpened. And this note, it was in your father's handwriting? No, she admitted. The handwriting was completely unfamiliar to me. For a moment, none of us spoke. The weight of her words hung heavily in the air. I leaned forward. Miss Mercer, what happened to his belongings? The hotel kept them for a while, hoping he would return, she explained. But after several months, with no sign of him, they were eventually turned over to me. Theodore exhaled slowly, his sharp mind already piecing together fragments of the puzzle. Miss Mercer, he said, you mentioned that your father had been in India for many years. Did he have any close friends in London? Only one, as far as I know, Evelyn answered. A man named Major Henry Ashton. They served together in India, and my father often spoke fondly of him in his letters. Did you contact Major Ashton after your father's disappearance? Theodore asked. Yes, she replied. I visited him at his home, but to my surprise he claimed he had no idea my father was even in England. I exchanged a glance with Theodore. That was a significant detail. You're sure he was telling the truth? I asked. Evelyn hesitated. I can't say for certain. He seemed genuine, but something about his demeanor made me uneasy. He kept insisting that he hadn't seen my father in years, yet I noticed that he avoided eye contact whenever I pressed. For details, Theodore tapped his fingers against his chin, considering this new information. Miss Mercer, let's fast forward a few years. What happened after your father's disappearance? She sighed. For 4 years, I had no answers. The police eventually closed the case, and I was left with nothing but questions. And then? Theodore prompted. Her eyes darkened. Then, one morning in May, I saw a strange advertisement in the newspaper. It asked for the address of a Miss Evelyn Mercer and said that if I responded, I would receive good news. I frowned. Who placed the advertisement? I don't know, she admitted, but I did as it instructed. The next day, I received a small package in the mail. Inside was a pearl, just like the ones I have been receiving every year since. She opened her handbag and retrieved a small box, lifting the lid to reveal 6 beautiful pearls, each perfectly round and shimmering under the candlelight. They arrived without fail, year after year, on the exact same date. There was never a note, never an explanation. Just a pearl in a small, simple box. Theodore's eyes narrowed slightly as he examined the pearls. And then, today, you received the letter. She nodded. Yes, the letter instructing me to go to the Victoria Theatre tonight. The room fell silent once more. Finally, Theodore sat back, clasping his hands together. Miss Mercer, your story is extraordinary. A missing father, a cryptic note, a mysterious advertisement, and a string of annual gifts. This is no ordinary case. I watched as Evelyn clenched her hands together. Do you think my father is still alive? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Theodore didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood up, walked to the fireplace, and stared into the flickering flames. Then, finally, he turned back to her. I don't know yet, but I do know this. Someone has been watching you all these years. Someone who knows more than they're willing to say. And tonight, at the Victoria Theatre, we may just find out who. Evelyn nodded slowly, determination replacing the fear in her eyes. Theodore picked up his pocket watch and checked the time. It's now 3:30. Be back here at 6, Miss Mercer. Dr. Carter and I will accompany you. And whatever happens, you will not face this alone. With a grateful nod, Evelyn rose to her feet. Thank you, Mr. Hawthorne. Dr. Carter. As she left the room, Theodore turned to me, a glimmer of excitement in his eyes. Edward, we are about to walk into something far more dangerous than we expected. I tightened my grip on my chair. The mystery had only just begun. Chapter 3. The Cryptic Invitation. The clock on the mantelpiece struck 6. The golden hands moved with a quiet precision, marking the passage of time with an air of inevitability. The room was dimly lit, the glow of the fireplace casting flickering shadows across the walls of 221B Baker Street. Theodore Hawthorne stood by the window, his sharp gaze fixed on the fog-laden streets below. I, Dr. Edward Carter, sat in my chair, checking my pocket watch anxiously. Tonight, we were walking into the unknown. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Mrs. Hudson entered, her usual calm demeanor unchanged. "Miss Mercer has arrived." Moment later, Evelyn Mercer stepped into the room. She was dressed in a dark navy blue cloak, the hood pulled down to reveal her golden hair pinned neatly in place. Though her face was composed, her hands were clasped together tightly, a silent indication of the nervous energy coursing through her. "Are you ready?" Theodore asked, his voice even, controlled. Evelyn nodded. "Yes, but I must admit, I'm frightened." I offered her a reassuring smile. "You have every right to be, but you are not alone. Theodore and I will not let anything happen to you." She exhaled softly. "Thank you, both of you." Theodore grabbed his coat and his cane, then glanced at me. "Edward, are you armed?" I patted the inside of my coat where my revolver was, safely tucked away. "Always." Theodore smirked. "Good. Then let's go." The night had fully descended upon London, wrapping the city in a thick, damp fog. The streets were quieter now, save for the occasional rattle of a passing carriage or the distant murmur of pedestrians making their way home. We hailed a cab, and as we climbed inside, Evelyn sat between us. She held her hands together, fingers entwined, her knuckles pale against the dark fabric of her gloves. "What do you think will happen tonight?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Theodore adjusted his gloves before replying. "It is impossible to say, but whoever sent you that letter has been watching you for years. Tonight they have chosen to reveal themselves. The only question is, do they come as friend or foe?" Evelyn shuddered slightly. I reached over and gave her hand a reassuring pat. "We will find out soon enough," I added. The journey to Victoria Theatre felt longer than it should have. The night air was thick with suspense, and the rhythmic clatter of the horses' hooves against the cobblestone only heightened my anticipation. Arrival at Victoria Theatre. We arrived outside Victoria Theatre at precisely 7 o'clock. The grand building loomed before us, its towering facade illuminated by flickering gas lamps. A steady stream of patrons dressed in fine evening attire made their way inside, eager for the night's performance. But our purpose here was not entertainment. The letter had instructed Evelyn to stand by the left entrance. We guided her there, positioning ourselves slightly behind her, watching everyone who passed. Theodore kept his posture relaxed, but I knew better. His sharp eyes were scanning the crowd, cataloging every face, every movement. Minutes passed. The chill of the evening air settled into my bones. I checked my pocket watch. 7:10 p.m. Nothing. Evelyn swallowed hard. Perhaps no one is coming. Theodore didn't reply. He was too busy watching a man approaching from across the street. A short, thin figure, dressed in a long dark coat and a bowler hat, moved swiftly toward us. He carried a certain nervous energy, his head darting left and right as if checking for pursuers. As he reached us, he hesitated. Then, in a low voice, he asked, "Miss Mercer?" Evelyn stiffened but nodded. "Yes, The man exhaled sharply. Good. Come with me. But be quick, and whatever you do, don't attract attention. Theodore stepped forward, blocking the man's path. His stance was not overtly threatening, but there was a silent authority in the way he held himself. Not so fast, he said smoothly. We would like some answers first. Who are you, and why have you brought us here? The man's eyes flickered between us, his nervousness increasing. He pulled at the brim of his hat and whispered, There is no time for questions. They are watching. We must leave now. Who is they? I demanded. But before he could answer, a sudden noise cut through the air. The distant echo of a sharp whistle. The man paled. Without another word, he grabbed Evelyn's wrist and yanked her toward him. Before he could drag her away, Theodore moved like lightning. He seized the man's arm, twisting it behind his back in one smooth motion. I strongly suggest, Theodore said in a dangerously calm voice, that you explain yourself before I decide to break your wrist. The man gasped in pain, struggling to free himself. You don't understand, he hissed. They're already here. The chase begins. I followed his gaze and saw two shadowy figures emerging from the other side of the street. They were moving quickly, too quickly. Theodore released the man, who immediately took off running into the alley beside the theater. Follow. Him! Theodore barked. We ran! Evelyn struggled to keep up as we pushed through the darkened alleyways of London, our footsteps echoing against the damp cobblestones. Behind us, the two figures gave chase, their boots striking the ground in rapid succession. The man in the bowler hat was fast, but Theodore was faster. As we reached a narrow passage, our informant suddenly pivoted into a doorway and disappeared inside. Theodore and I followed without hesitation. Evelyn stumbled slightly, but I caught her arm just as the door slammed shut behind us. The secret meeting. We found ourselves in a dimly lit room. It was small, dusty, and cluttered with old furniture. The man we had chased was panting heavily, his back pressed against the wall. Theodore brushed the dust from his coat, his expression unreadable. Now, he said. No more running, no more riddles. You brought us here. Explain yourself. The man hesitated for a moment, then reached into his coat. Instinctively, I drew my revolver. He froze, then slowly withdrew a folded piece of paper. This, he whispered, is the truth your father never had the chance to tell you. Evelyn's hands trembled as she took the paper and unfolded it. Theodore and I leaned in to read. Inside, in faded ink, were written 3 simple words, the mark of 4. A heavy silence filled the room. Theodore's gaze darkened. So, it wasn't just a note in a book after all. I turned back to the man. Tell us everything. Right now. The man took a shaky breath. What I am about to tell you may get us all killed. Evelyn clenched the paper in her hands. I could feel it. We had just crossed into something far more dangerous than we had ever imagined. Chapter 4. The hidden treasure. The atmosphere in the small, dimly lit room was thick with tension. The man, whose nervous energy had only increased as we cornered him, was still breathing heavily, sweat beading on his forehead. Theodore Hawthorne, standing tall and composed, kept his gaze fixed on him. There was no escape now. He had brought us here, and now he would answer our questions. Evelyn Mercer clutched the piece of paper tightly in her hands, her fingers white from the pressure. Her wide blue eyes flickered between the man, Theodore, and the piece of paper, as though trying to make sense of everything that had happened in the last few minutes. "I will tell you everything," the man said, his voice shaking. "But you must understand. It was never supposed to go like this. I was just following orders, trying to keep the secret safe. The treasure. It was never meant for anyone else to find." Theodore's expression didn't change, but his voice was unwavering. "The treasure? What treasure? Who gave you these orders? What's all this about the Mark of Four?" The man gulped, then seemed to brace himself, as though he had been waiting for this moment. "It all began years ago, long before you even knew about it." He paused, then took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. "My name is Henry Ashford, and I used to work as an assistant for Colonel Edmund Langley, a man who was once a trusted officer in the British Army. Colonel Langley and your father, Captain Leonard Mercer, were very close friends. They served together in India and had many shared experiences. But there was something neither of them ever told anyone." Evelyn's voice was soft, but it cut through the heavy silence. "What was it? What secret were they keeping?" Ashford's gaze flickered briefly toward her before he looked down at his hands, still trembling. "The great Agra treasure. The Pai." Words hung in the air like a cloud of mystery. The name sounded like something out of a legend. "The Agra treasure?" I asked, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck rise. "What's that? And why is it so important?" Ashford glanced around nervously, as if he was afraid someone might be listening. "The treasure was found in India during a time of great unrest. It was hidden away in a secret chamber of the ancient Agra fort. But it wasn't just any treasure. It was a hoard of jewels, gold, and priceless artifacts. More wealth than any man could ever hope for. And your father, Captain Mercer, was part of the group that discovered it." Evelyn looked horrified. "You're saying my father found this treasure and never told me? Why? And why didn't anyone know about it?" Ashford shifted uncomfortably, his eyes avoiding hers. "It wasn't that simple. The treasure was not meant to be shared. Your father and Colonel Langley, along with 2 others, decided to keep it a secret, locked away. They promised each other that only the 4 of them would know about it. They even made a pact, the Mark of Four. It was their symbol, their bond." I exchanged a glance with Theodore. "So, this Mark of Four was not just a note. It was a promise between these men?" Ashford nodded. "Yes. And when your father came back to England, he left the treasure hidden in the Agra fort, in the same place where it had been found. He swore he would never tell anyone about it. But after a few years, Colonel Langley grew paranoid. He began to fear that someone else might come for the treasure, someone who could unearth its secrets and claim it for themselves. Evelyn was growing more agitated. So, what happened? Why did Colonel Langley send you to meet me? Ashford winced at her words. Because Colonel Langley, he died under mysterious circumstances. But before he passed away, he sent me to find you. He wanted to make sure that the treasure stayed hidden. He told me that you were the last one who could protect it from falling into the wrong hands. Evelyn looked stunned. What do you mean? Why would I have to protect it? What do I have to do with any of this? Ashford swallowed hard. Because your father left something behind for you. A key. A key to unlock the secret room where the treasure was hidden. A key. The words echoed in my mind. A key to the treasure. Where is it? I asked, my voice firm. Ashford's eyes darkened. It's lost. The key is gone. But not entirely. Theodore raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. What do... You mean, not entirely? Where is it? Ashford's voice dropped to a whisper. It's been in plain sight all along, but no one knew where to look. The search begins. I turned to Theodore, a question hanging in the air. What does that mean? How can it be in plain sight? Theodore, as always, seemed to be 3 steps ahead of everyone else. He gave Ashford a piercing look. You've been part of this for too long, haven't you? You've been running from something, from someone. But now it's time to face it. Ashford's eyes flickered with something between fear and desperation. I did what I had to do to survive. And now I must make things right. Theodore turned to me, his voice steady as ever. Edward, we need to go. This treasure isn't just a story, it's real. And I suspect we're not the only ones who know about it now. I nodded. But where do we begin? Evelyn, still, clutching the piece of paper, suddenly spoke, her voice trembling with determination. I think I know where we must go next. Theodore and I turned to her. Where? We both asked in unison. Evelyn swallowed. The Rosewood Hotel. My father stayed there when he first arrived in London. If the key is truly hidden in plain sight, it could be there. It could be in the place where everything began. Theodore's eyes gleamed with understanding. That's where we'll start, and we must be quick. We can't afford to waste time. At the Rosewood Hotel. The air was colder now as we made our way back through the foggy streets of London, the city's shadows growing deeper with each step. The Rosewood Hotel stood ahead of us, a stately building that had seen countless arrivals and departures over the years. Evelyn led the way, her eyes scanning the surroundings as though something might jump out at her. Theodore, ever the careful observer, was already piecing things together in his mind, while I kept a close eye on the entrances and exits. We entered the hotel, and the warm light of the lobby greeted us like a refuge from the cold. A tall man behind the desk looked up as we approached. "Good evening," he said with a polite but distant smile. "How may I assist you?" Evelyn stepped forward. "I'm looking for any information about my father's stay here. Captain Leonard Mercer. He was here about 10 years ago. The clerk's face remained neutral, but I could see the subtle shift in his expression, a momentary flash of recognition. "Captain Mercer, you say?" he asked. "I believe I have some records of his stay, if you'll just give me a moment." As the clerk turned to sift through the dusty ledger behind the counter, Theodore leaned close to me, his voice a low whisper. "I think we're getting close. Keep your wits about you, Edward." I nodded, my hand instinctively resting on the revolver at my side. The clerk returned with an old guest book in his hands, flipping it open to the correct page. "Captain Leonard Mercer. Yes, I see his name here," he muttered as he scanned the entry. He frowned. "He left suddenly one evening and never returned. But there is something unusual here." He leaned in, showing us the entry. There, scrawled next to Mercer's name, was a strange symbol, a crude sketch of a four-pronged mark, the same mark that had appeared in the letter. Evelyn gasped. "That's it! That's the mark!" Theodore's voice was calm, but there was excitement behind it. "This is no coincidence. This is where it all began." And so we knew. The treasure was closer than ever, and we were finally on the path to uncovering its secrets. Chapter 5. The Mark of Four. The Rosewood Hotel had been quiet since our visit, but the discovery of the strange symbol beside Captain Leonard Mercer's name in the ledger kept us on edge. Theodore Hawthorne, always the calm and calculated one, was pacing back and forth in the small room we had rented for the evening. The only sound in the room was the soft rustle of papers as Evelyn Mercer continued to sift through the guest book in front of her. The symbol in her father's registration had stirred something in her, a feeling of dread and yet, oddly, of hope. Evelyn closed the guest book and looked up at Theodore. "What does it mean? That mark. It was the same symbol in the letter, the mark of four." Theodore, who had been deep in thought, finally stopped pacing. He turned to face her, his brow furrowed. "It's not just a symbol. It's a warning. Whoever left that mark knows about the treasure. And it's clear now that the treasure is not only about wealth, it's about control." I sat in a chair nearby, watching the exchange with growing unease. Theodore's mind was already working at full speed, but I was more concerned with the implications of the treasure and the people who were trying to find it. Who else knew? And, more importantly, how far would they go to claim what had been hidden for so many years? Evelyn shifted uneasily in her seat. "So, what do we do now? How do we find it? And what's the real danger here?" Theodore's voice was steady, but there was an edge of urgency in it. "The mark of four isn't just a drawing, it's a clue. A clue that ties your father, Colonel Langley, and the others to something much bigger. Whoever left it, they want it found. But I'm certain they don't want it found by you, Miss Mercer." I leaned forward. "But how do we proceed? We know the treasure's somewhere, hidden. But where? What is the next step?" Theodore's eyes narrowed in thought. "We need to understand why Colonel Langley was so paranoid. Why was the treasure kept hidden? And what exactly did Langley mean by keep it secret? There's something he wasn't telling us." Evelyn suddenly stood up, her voice trembling. "But why would he hide it? Why not let me know? Why did my father, who I thought I knew so well, keep this from me? Theodore placed a hand on her shoulder. That's the question we need to answer. And to find the answer, we have to keep going. The hidden meaning of the mark. As the days passed, we continued our investigation. Theodore, ever diligent, visited old records and libraries in search of more information about Colonel Langley's time in India and Captain Mercer's involvement in the treasure's discovery. The mystery deepened, but so did our understanding. One morning, we sat in a cafe near Covent Garden, discussing the latest developments. Theodore unfolded a map of Agra, showing the location of the Agra fort where the treasure had been hidden. He pointed to a spot marked with an ancient symbol, resembling the Mark of Four. This symbol is not just arbitrary, Theodore explained, tracing the map with his finger. It's linked to the treasure, but this symbol, it's much older than Mercer or Langley. It's tied to a society that dates back centuries, a secret order that guarded sacred treasures. I furrowed my brow, trying to piece it together. A secret order? Who were they? Why hide something so valuable? Theodore's eyes were intense. They were known as the guardians of the Agra treasure. They swore an oath to protect the treasure at all costs. The Mark of Four symbolizes the four men who discovered the treasure and kept it from the rest of the world. But, somewhere along the way, one of them betrayed the others. Evelyn's face paled. A betrayal? My father? Theodore nodded slowly. It's possible. The question is, who betrayed the others, and why? We know that Colonel Langley was paranoid before his death. The question is, what made him so afraid? Who was coming after the treasure? A sudden lead. That afternoon, after another trip to the archives, Theodore returned to our apartment with an old letter he had uncovered. He unfolded it carefully, his face grim. This is from Colonel Langley to Captain Mercer, he said. Listen to this. The treasure must stay hidden at all costs. The man with the wooden leg is coming for it. He will stop at nothing. He was always a part of the order, but now he is the enemy. Beware. Protect it as you would your own life. I cannot trust anyone but you. If I die, you must finish what we started. The Mark of Four will protect us. For a time. Theodore paused, letting the words sink in. The man with the wooden leg. Who could he be? I felt a chill run down my spine. It's the same man Langley was afraid of. But who is he? And why does he want the treasure? Evelyn, her face pale, looked at Theodore. What do we do? Next, we know the treasure is connected to my father, but we don't know where to go. How do we find it? Theodore stood up abruptly. We need to find the man with the wooden leg. He's the key to this whole puzzle. If we can track him down, we can uncover what happened to the treasure, and we can finally get answers. I nodded. We'll need to be careful. Whoever this man is, he won't stop until he has the treasure. And he's probably watching us. Right now. Evelyn clenched her fists, determination flashing in her eyes. Then let's find him before he finds us. The hunt for the wooden-legged man. The next few days were a blur of investigation. Theodore had a network of informants, and we followed every lead, every whisper, until one evening we received a tip-off. A man matching the description of the wooden-legged man had been spotted near Old Temple Row, a place long abandoned, now rumored to be the hideout of criminals and thieves. We set off immediately. Old Temple Row was dark and silent as we approached, the sound of our footsteps barely audible against the damp cobblestones. The air was thick with the smell of rain-soaked earth and decay. We found the entrance to an old warehouse, its door slightly ajar. Theodore motioned for us to be quiet, and we moved inside. The dim light inside barely illuminated the crates stacked in the corners, and the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally. We crept forward, and just as I thought I heard a noise, a voice whispered from the shadows, "You're too late." Before we could react, a figure emerged from the darkness. The man with the wooden leg. He stood tall, his features half hidden in shadow, but the unmistakable limp of his wooden leg gave him away immediately. Evelyn gasped. "It's you. I knew you were coming for it." The man chuckled, his voice low and menacing. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, miss. The treasure doesn't belong to you. It never did." Theodore stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Then it's you who has been hunting it all these years." The man's grin widened. "I've been hunting you all this time, Mr. Hawthorne." Suddenly, the tension in the room became unbearable, and we knew that the real battle for the treasure was about to begin. Chapter 6. The Hunt Begins. The air was thick with tension, as if the entire world had come to a standstill in those few moments. The figure in front of us, the man with the wooden leg, stood motionless in the dim light of the abandoned warehouse. His presence was chilling, his face half hidden in the shadows, a wicked grin playing on his lips. I could feel the weight of his gaze, calculating, waiting for something. Evelyn's breath was shallow, her face pale as she stood frozen in shock. The man had been a shadow in her life for so long, and now he was here, more real, more dangerous than she had imagined. Theodore Hawthorne, ever the strategist, remained calm, his eyes locked on the figure before us, sizing him up. "So, it's you," Theodore said, his voice a smooth contrast to the sharp edge of the moment. "The man with the wooden leg. You've been following us all this time." The man smirked, his lips curling with dark amusement. "I've been waiting for this moment, Mr. Hawthorne, waiting for the right time. And now you're here. How convenient." I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as his words settled in. He wasn't just some random criminal. He was connected to everything: the treasure, the betrayal, the Mark of Four. He was one of the men that had been entrusted with its secret, and now he had come to claim it. "Why are you after the treasure?" Evelyn's voice trembled, but there was a hint of anger in it. "It belongs to my father. It belongs to me." The man chuckled softly, the sound echoing in the empty space. "No, Miss Mercer, it doesn't belong to you. It was never meant for people like you. You're just a part of a much bigger game, and you're in over your head." Theodore stepped forward, unperturbed. You think you can control everything? That you can simply take what doesn't belong to you? The man's eyes flickered with something dangerous. I don't have to control everything, Mr. Hawthorne. I just need to finish what was started. The treasure isn't just about gold or jewels. It's about power, and whoever possesses it controls more than just wealth. You, Miss Mercer, are in the way. Evelyn's hand instinctively reached for the small pouch of pearls she carried, her fingers trembling slightly. The man's eyes followed the movement, his grin widening. Before I could speak, Theodore's voice cut through the thick tension. You're wrong. You're not in control of this situation. You're not in control of anything. Now tell us what we need to know. Where is the treasure? The man's expression hardened. You think you can intimidate me, Mr. Hawthorne? You're too late. The treasure has already been moved. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. Moved? What do you mean? The man's face shifted into something almost sadistic. It's been taken to its final resting place, where it can never be found again. And you're wasting your time looking for it. Before anyone could respond, he turned on his heel, his wooden legs scraping the floor as he moved swiftly toward the door. You'll never find it in time. The treasure is beyond your reach. Good luck with that. We were left in stunned silence as the echo of his footsteps faded into the distance. Theodore remained motionless, his eyes narrowed in thought. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing in on us, the enormity of what we had just learned sinking in. The treasure has been moved, I muttered. And it's beyond our reach? What does that even mean? Theodore's sharp eyes were focused on the spot where the man had been standing moments before. It means we have to move faster. The Mark of 4 is more than just a symbol. It's a map, a guide, and we need to decipher it before it's too late. Evelyn, still visibly shaken but determined, stepped forward. How do we find the treasure? If it's been moved, then there must be a clue somewhere. My father wouldn't have left it unguarded. There has to be something we're missing. Theodore glanced at the map of Agra that we had been studying earlier, his eyes scanning it with growing intensity. The treasure isn't just about the physical location. It's about understanding the language of the guardians. The mark of 4 represents more than just a place. It's a key to the next step. I watched as Theodore's mind worked, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. What do you mean? I asked, trying to catch up. He didn't look up from the map. The 4 men who discovered the treasure swore an oath to protect it. They each took a part of the treasure and left a mark to indicate its true location. But over time, the meaning of the mark was lost. It's not just a symbol, it's a direction. Evelyn looked confused. A direction? How do you mean? Theodore traced a line across the map, his finger moving deliberately. The 4 marks on the map correspond to specific locations within the Agra fort, each one tied to a part of the treasure's hiding place. The key to finding the treasure is to understand where those marks lead. Each one marks the way to the next stage of the journey. Evelyn's eyes widened. So, the treasure is hidden in pieces? Theodore nodded. Exactly. And only the right person, someone who knows the truth about the treasure, can bring those pieces together. He turned to her, his gaze unwavering. You're the key, Evelyn. Your father was the one who first discovered it. But now, it's your turn to finish what he started." The weight of his words settled heavily on Evelyn's shoulders. She stood there, frozen for a moment, as if the responsibility had just been thrust upon her all at once. I don't know if I'm ready," she whispered. "What if I fail? What if I can't find it?" Theodore stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You won't fail. We won't let you. Together, we'll find the treasure, and when we do, we'll make sure it stays hidden from the wrong people." I couldn't help but feel the gravity of the situation. We were no longer just chasing a hidden treasure. We were hunting for something far more dangerous, something that could change everything, not just for Evelyn, but for all of us. The chase intensifies. As the days passed, the search for the treasure grew more urgent. We moved from one location to another, following the clues hidden in the marks, each step bringing us closer to the final stage of the treasure's journey. But the closer we got, the more I felt the shadow of danger looming over us. We were not alone in this search. Job, man with the wooden leg, was still out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. And with every step we took, I knew we were getting closer to him. One evening, Theodore called us together in a small, dimly lit room at the inn where we were staying. He placed a piece of parchment on the table, a sketch of Agra Fort with markings that matched the symbols we had seen earlier. "This is it," Theodore said, pointing to the center of the map. "We're almost there. The treasure is hidden beneath the old watchtower, but there's more to this place than meets the eye. We need to get there before anyone else does." Evelyn nodded, determination in her eyes. "Let's finish this. Let's find the treasure and make sure it stays hidden." The hunt had begun, and this time, there was no turning back. Chapter 7. The River Chase. The night was eerily silent as we stood on the banks of the River Thames, the fog thick and wrapping itself like a heavy blanket around everything. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of rain and the quiet murmur of distant waters. The pale moon cast fleeting shadows across the water, its reflection barely visible beneath the mist. We had traveled for hours, following the trail that had led us here, to the river's edge. Theodore Hawthorne was silent, his sharp gaze scanning the surroundings, calculating the next move. I could feel the tension in the air as we all prepared for what was to come. The chase had led us this far, but we knew now that we weren't simply pursuing a treasure. We were chasing a dangerous man, the one who had haunted our every step, the man with the wooden leg. He was ahead of us now, and we had no idea how much time we had left. What was clear, however, was that he had been moving with purpose, and we had no choice but to follow. Evelyn Mercer, though visibly shaken by everything that had happened so far, stood with a determination in her eyes. The weight of her father's secret, the treasure, and the danger that now surrounded her were clear on her face, but she refused to back down. "We're getting closer, aren't we?" she asked, her voice steady despite the apprehension in her tone. "We are," Theodore replied, not looking up from the dark waters in front of us. "He's ahead of us. We need to find out where he's going, but we can't lose him." My gaze moved across the river. The fog had thickened, and the water appeared almost black in the dim light. I could hear the distant hum of London, but in this quiet moment, it felt as if we were the only ones alive, the world pressing against us with an oppressive silence. We stood at the edge of an old dock, the wood creaking under our feet as a cold breeze swept across the river. The man with the wooden leg had been seen boarding a small steam launch, a boat that was supposed to be quick enough to outrun anyone who dared follow him. We knew that if we didn't catch up with him now, we would lose the trail completely. "The boat's here," I muttered, pointing toward the small launch tied to the dock. Theodore turned toward the launch, assessing it quickly. "This will do? We'll have to make it fast." We moved quickly, jumping onto the boat. Theodore took the helm, his hands steady and sure as he started the engine, the low rumble of the steam power vibrating beneath us. Evelyn and I sat at the back, watching, the water around us prepared for anything. The man we were chasing had a head start, but we were going to catch up with him, or die trying. The chase begins. As the boat sped through the murky water, the mist seemed to part for only a moment, and then it closed in again, hiding our path. The engine sputtered beneath us, the noise a harsh contrast to the otherwise serene night. Theodore's hands gripped the wheel, his focus unyielding. We were gaining speed, but we still couldn't see the wooden-legged man or his boat ahead. "He must be close," I said, my voice laced with urgency. "He is," Theodore replied, his voice steady but with a hint of impatience. "The mark of his trail is easy to follow. Look for the wake in the water." I nodded and scanned the surface, watching the ripples and small waves that the steam launch had left in its wake. We needed to find that trail, to follow the small clues that would tell us where the man had gone. "There," I pointed suddenly, and Theodore steered the boat in that direction. The faint outline of the other launch was visible now, cutting through the mist ahead of us. The wooden-legged man was still within reach. "Hold on tight," Theodore warned, his voice cutting through the noise of the engine. "We're going after him." We increased speed, the boat's engine growling as we pushed forward. The water churned beneath us, spraying droplets into the air as we gained on the other boat. Through the mist, I could just make out the silhouette of the man standing at the back of the launch, his wooden leg gleaming faintly in the moonlight. Close pursuit. We were getting closer. I could see the man's figure more clearly now, his stance rigid as he watched the approaching boat. He knew we were coming. There was no more running. This was a confrontation. The wooden-legged man turned, sharply, his hand moving quickly, and in that instant, I saw the glint of a gun in his hand. "He's armed," I shouted, instinctively reaching for the revolver at my side. Theodore's eyes flashed in alarm, but he didn't slow down. We were too close. We couldn't turn back now. Without warning, the man fired a shot, the loud crack of the gunshot splitting the night. The bullet whizzed past us, missing by mere inches. I instinctively ducked, but Theodore kept the boat on course, his eyes locked. On the target ahead. We're almost there, Theodore muttered, his voice tight with concentration. Just a little closer, and we'll be on top of him. The wooden-legged man fired again, but this time his aim was off. The boat rocked as the shot missed, sending a small wave of water splashing over the side. I could hear the distant rumble of thunder, and the wind began to pick up, adding to the chaos of the chase. The final push. We were within a few feet now, so close that I could hear the clank of the man's wooden leg against the boat's edge as he moved. He turned to face us, a twisted grin on his face. His eyes locked on Theodore, a look of cold calculation behind them. "You think you can stop me?" the man yelled, his voice barely audible over the noise of the engine. "I've already won." But Theodore didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned forward and slammed the throttle down, pushing the boat forward with unexpected speed. We surged forward, the boat slicing through the water as the wind howled around us. "Not today," Theodore replied with steely resolve. With a final surge, we collided with the man's boat, sending both launches rocking violently. The man staggered, losing his footing, but he quickly recovered. He reached for a rope and threw it toward the dock, his eyes wild with desperation. "It's over!" I shouted, my hand gripping my gun tightly. I stood, pointing the revolver toward him. "You're not getting away!" The man stopped, his expression shifting from defiance to a calculated calm. He straightened up, carefully adjusting his stance, his eyes narrowing as if he had already accepted defeat. "You think you've won?" He sneered. "You don't know what you're dealing with. The treasure. It's already gone. Even if you stop me, it's too late." For a moment I hesitated, but Theodore quickly stepped forward. "Where is it?" he demanded, his voice low but insistent. "Tell us, and we'll let you go." The man smirked, shaking his head. "I'm not the one you need to worry about," he said cryptically. "You should be more concerned with the one who's coming for you next." Before either of us could respond, he turned sharply and threw himself over the edge of the boat, disappearing into the cold waters of the Thames. We stood there in stunned silence for a moment, the fog swirling around us and the sound of the river flowing softly beneath. The man with the wooden leg was gone, but the treasure, the mystery, still loomed large. Evelyn, her eyes wide with confusion, looked to Theodore. What did he mean? Theodore exhaled slowly, his eyes dark with concern. "I don't know. But whatever it is, we're not finished yet. We'll find out soon enough." The hunt was far from over. The game had just begun. Chapter 8. The Final Confrontation. The morning sun struggled to break through the thick fog that still clung to the streets of London. The River Thames was quiet now, its surface smooth like glass, reflecting the muted light of the early day. Our small steam launch bobbed gently in the water, but the stillness of the scene did nothing to ease the growing tension that filled the air. The man with the wooden leg had vanished into the river, his cryptic words echoing in our minds. "You should be more concerned with the one who's coming for you next." Despite the damp cold that surrounded us, The words were like a shadow that refused to leave. Evelyn Mercer stood at the edge of the boat, her face pale, her eyes scanning the horizon. She had come so far, only to be caught in a web of secrets and lies. Secrets her father had kept from her, and a treasure that seemed to have a life of its own. Now, with the man gone, there was no more running, no more evading the truth. Theodore Hawthorne, ever the strategist, stood by her side, his eyes narrowed in thought. He had been quiet since the chase, his mind clearly working to untangle the web we had found ourselves in. I sat in the back of the boat, the weight of the revolver heavy in my hand. "What now?" I asked, breaking the silence that had settled over us like a blanket. Theodore turned toward me, his expression serious. "Now, we find out what the man meant. We need to prepare ourselves. This isn't over. Not yet." I nodded, already sensing the unease in the air. The clues, the chase, the cryptic warnings, it all pointed to one thing. We were about to face something much bigger than any of us had imagined. Evelyn, her voice steady but laced with uncertainty, spoke up. "What do we do next, Theodore? You said we need to prepare. What are we up against?" Theodore exhaled slowly, his gaze distant, as he looked toward the distant city skyline. "We need to find out who the man was working for. He wasn't working alone, Evelyn. He's part of a larger group, an organization that's been after the Agra treasure for years." The realization hit me with force. An organization? You think this is all part of something bigger? Theodore's eyes met mine, a hint of cold calculation in them. "Absolutely. The man with the wooden leg, he's just the messenger. The treasure, the betrayal, the mark of 4, it's all tied to something older, something that goes far beyond your father's discovery." Evelyn turned to face Theodore, her eyes wide with fear. "Then what are we dealing with? Who are they?" Theodore's lips curled into a grim smile. "They're called the Brotherhood of the Four, a secret society that was formed centuries ago. Their sole purpose was to guard and control the Agra treasure. Your father, Colonel Langley, and the others were once part of it. But over time, greed and betrayal tore them apart. And now, the Brotherhood wants the treasure back no matter what the cost." Evelyn's face went pale. "My father, he was part of this?" Theodore nodded. "Yes. And I'm afraid your father made a choice. Evelyn, a choice that could have put your life in danger. The Brotherhood doesn't let go of what they consider theirs. And now that we're involved, they'll stop at nothing to make sure the treasure stays out of our hands." The words hit like a punch. The Brotherhood of the Four, a group of powerful men and women who controlled the treasure. And now they were coming after us. We weren't just after gold or jewels. We were after something much darker. The control of something that had the power to change the world. The final destination. Theodore's plan was simple. We needed to get to the treasure before the Brotherhood did. The clues had been leading us to the old ruins just outside of London, a place where no one had dared to go for decades. But the closer we got to our destination, the more uneasy I became. The path we had chosen was dangerous. There were whispers of a hidden chamber beneath the ruins, a place where the treasure had been stored, untouched for years. But finding the entrance wasn't going to be easy. We made our way on foot, the ruins looming ahead of us, a forgotten place where time seemed to stand still. Stone pillars, worn and weathered, jutted out of the ground like forgotten sentinels, and the air was thick with the scent of moss and decay. The wind howled through the trees, sending a chill down my spine. The closer we got, the more oppressive. The atmosphere became as if the very ground beneath our feet was warning us to turn back. "This is it," Theodore said, his voice firm as he stopped in front of a large stone archway. "The treasure is beneath us, hidden from view. We need to be careful. The Brotherhood is close." I glanced around, my hand instinctively moving to the revolver at my side. "How do you know they're here?" Theodore smiled grimly. "Because I'm certain they've been watching us since the beginning. They know we're close to finding the treasure, and they won't let it slip away without a fight." The Confrontation. As we descended into the dark, stone corridors beneath the ruins, the temperature dropped, and a sense of foreboding grew heavier. The walls were lined with ancient carvings, their meanings lost to time, but there was no mistaking the symbols of power that adorned them. The mark of 4 was etched into the stone, guiding us deeper into the labyrinth beneath the earth. It felt like hours before we finally reached the heart of the ruins, a massive underground chamber. In the center stood an altar-like structure, surrounded by 4 stone pillars, and at the very center of it all was a chest, large and heavy, just as we had been told. "The treasure is here?" Theodore said, his voice quiet, yet full of conviction. "But we need to move quickly. The Brotherhood will be here soon." Evelyn stepped forward, her hand trembling as she approached the chest. "How do we open it?" Theodore glanced at the stone pillars surrounding us, each marked with the same symbol we had seen before, the mark of 4. "We need to unlock the pillars first. The symbols on each one must be pressed in the right order." We wasted no time. Theodore led the way, his hands moving deftly over the ancient carvings as he deciphered the clues. "It's a puzzle," he muttered, "but I think we're close." Suddenly, the ground trembled. A low rumble echoed through the chamber as the stone walls began to shift, and I felt the presence of something, or someone, moving toward us. "Hurry!" Evelyn cried, panic creeping into her voice. "They're here!" Just as Theodore pressed the final symbol into place, a loud crash rang through the chamber, and the door at the far end flew open. The Brotherhood, the man with the wooden leg, appeared first, followed by several other figures cloaked in dark robes, their faces obscured. The leader, a tall figure with cold eyes, stepped forward, his voice low and menacing. "You've come too late," he said, his eyes fixed on Evelyn. "The treasure belongs to us. You had your chance, but now it's ours." The atmosphere was thick with the scent of betrayal and danger. The Brotherhood had found us, and they were not going to let us leave without a fight. Evelyn, standing between Theodore and me, looked up at the treasure chest, her eyes filled with fear and defiance. "I won't let you take it," she said, her voice shaking but strong. The leader smiled coldly. "You have no choice, Miss Mercer." In an instant, Chaos erupted. The Brotherhood moved with lightning speed, drawing weapons from beneath their cloaks. I barely had time to react before the air was filled with the sound of gunfire. Theodore pulled Evelyn to the ground, pulling her close as the bullets whizzed past. "Stay down!" he shouted, his hand moving to the revolver at his side. I fired, back, my shot finding its mark, and one of the Brotherhood's figures fell to the floor. The rest scrambled, their faces twisted in rage. "We need to move," Theodore shouted. "Get to the chest." Evelyn scrambled to her feet, reaching the chest with a determined expression. With one final push, she opened it. Inside, we found the treasure, jewels, gold, and priceless artifacts, just as we had been told. But it was not the treasure that caught my attention. It was the key that lay on top, a small, ornate object, shaped like a pendant, with the mark of 4 engraved on it. "The key," Theodore breathed. "This is what they wanted." Before we could react, the leader of the Brotherhood lunged forward, grabbing the pendant. "It's over," he snarled, holding it aloft. "The treasure is mine." But before he could make his move, Evelyn stepped forward, her voice cold and resolute. "Not today." With a swift motion, she grabbed the pendant from his grasp, slamming it into the chest and locking it once again. The Brotherhood's plans had failed. The treasure was safe. Chapter 9. The Truth Revealed. The dust in the ruined chamber hung heavy in the air, suspended in the dim light that filtered through cracks in the stone walls. The battle had ended, the sounds of gunfire now replaced by the eerie silence that surrounded us. We stood over the treasure chest, the victory feeling hollow, as though something more profound had yet to be uncovered. The Brotherhood had failed to claim the treasure, but they had left behind a trail of questions. Questions we needed to answer. Evelyn Mercer, standing near the chest, her hand resting on the cold metal lid, seemed distant, lost in thought. The weight of everything, the treasure, her father's legacy, the betrayals, and the secrets, had clearly taken its toll on her. Theodore Hawthorne, as composed as ever, was studying the surroundings, his sharp eyes scanning every detail in the room. I, too, felt the gravity of the moment, the chase, the revelations, and the risks we had taken had led us here. But now, we were on the brink of something even greater than the treasure itself. We had faced the Brotherhood and emerged victorious, but the most pressing question now was not about the treasure itself. It was about the truth. The moment of reflection. Approached Evelyn, my voice soft. "You're holding something far more valuable than gold or jewels now, Evelyn. The key. It's what the Brotherhood has been after." "But what is it really?" She looked up at me, her eyes tired but filled with a strange, quiet determination. "I don't know, Edward. My father kept so many things from me. But I know this much. He wanted me to understand the significance of the treasure, the mark of 4, and now, this key." Theodore joined us, his brow furrowed as he examined the pendant. He had been silent, lost in thought for the last few minutes. Finally he spoke, his voice steady, yet full of anticipation. "The key isn't just a symbol of the treasure. It's the last piece of the puzzle, the final piece that connects everything together. The Brotherhood believed that it would give them ultimate control over the treasure, but they were wrong. Evelyn stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. So, what is it then, Theodore? What's the truth? What has my father been hiding from me all these years? The hidden legacy. Theodore's gaze softened, his voice taking on a deeper, more serious tone. Your father, Captain Leonard Mercer, was one of the original members of the Brotherhood of the Four. He, along with Colonel Langley and the others, discovered the Agra treasure together. But there was a secret they didn't share with anyone, not even you. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. A secret? What secret? Theodore stepped back slightly, glancing at the treasure chest before continuing. The treasure wasn't just a hoard of riches. It was the key to a much larger conspiracy, one that has lasted for centuries. The Brotherhood's true purpose was never to protect the treasure. It was to control the power that the treasure represented. Your father realized the danger of such power and made a choice to protect it from the Brotherhood by keeping it hidden. That's why he left the key to you, Evelyn. He wanted you to finish what he started, to break the cycle of control. Could see the wheels turning in Evelyn's mind, the shock and confusion on her face slowly being replaced by understanding. So, my father was part of something bigger, something dangerous. Theodore nodded solemnly. Yes, he was the one who realized that the treasure wasn't just about wealth. It was about manipulating power, the kind of power that could change the world. Your father's choice was to hide the treasure, to protect you from it, to make sure no one, especially the Brotherhood, could ever use it for their own gain. I looked at Evelyn, my voice soft but firm. You're carrying the burden of that choice now. The key is yours, and with it comes the responsibility of ensuring that the treasure stays hidden. The Brotherhood isn't gone. They'll keep coming for it. But you have the means to protect it, to end the cycle. The key to the future. Evelyn's fingers traced the edges of the key, her face thoughtful, torn between the weight of the responsibility and the understanding of what she had to do next. The room was heavy with anticipation, and for the first time, I realized the true significance of this moment. The treasure, the chase, the danger. It had all led to this. Evelyn was now the key to something much greater than a mere fortune. I don't know if I'm ready for this, Evelyn whispered, her voice wavering as she looked up at us. How do I protect something like this? How do I stop the Brotherhood when they're already so close? Theodore met her gaze, his expression resolute. You don't have to do it alone, Evelyn. You never were meant to. We're in this together, and we'll make sure the treasure stays hidden. We'll make sure the Brotherhood never finds it. I nodded in agreement. We'll make sure they never get what they want. The power that comes with the treasure, it's too dangerous for anyone to wield. It's time to end this, for good. For a moment, there was silence, an unspoken agreement that we were in this together, that we would stand by Evelyn and protect the secret, no matter the cost. She wasn't just protecting her father's legacy anymore. She was fighting to break free from the chains of history, to stop a cycle of greed and betrayal that had lasted far too long. A new path. We stood there for a long moment, the weight of our decision settling into our bones. The treasure, now safely sealed within the chest, felt like a distant memory, its true significance now clear. The battle wasn't over, but the fight had changed. The real war was no longer about treasure. It was about power and the lengths people would go to control it. As Evelyn tucked the key securely into her pocket, she turned to face us, her eyes clearer, her resolve stronger than I had ever seen. I won't let them win, she said firmly. I'll protect the treasure. I'll keep it safe. No one will ever have the power they want. Theodore's eyes shone with a quiet pride. You have the strength to do this, Evelyn. I know you do. And we'll help you every step of the way. I could feel the shift in the air, a sense of finality that told me the end was near. The Brotherhood had been defeated, but their influence still loomed large. However, Evelyn was not the same woman who had walked into the ruins days ago. She was stronger now, more capable of understanding the weight of her inheritance, and more prepared to protect the treasure from the wrong hands. Let's go, Theodore said, his voice cutting through the moment of reflection. We have a future to build, Evelyn. A future without the darkness of the Brotherhood. It's time to leave the past behind. Evelyn gave a small nod, and together, we made our way out of the underground chamber, the treasure safely hidden once again, its legacy now a secret only to be shared by those who understood its true meaning. The future lay ahead of us, and though the path was uncertain, we were no longer afraid. We had uncovered the truth, and now we were ready to protect it forever. Chapter 10. The End of the Adventure. The soft hum of the train engine filled the air, the rhythmic sound lulling me into a sense of quiet satisfaction. The London skyline was disappearing behind us as we rode toward the countryside. The distance between us and the dangers of the past slowly growing. It was a strange feeling, the calm after the storm. The Agra treasure, the Brotherhood, the battles we had fought. It all felt like a distant memory, fading as the landscape blurred past. The windows. Evelyn Mercer sat beside me, her eyes fixed on the passing scenery, her face serene but thoughtful. She had come so far in such a short time, from a woman unsure of her father's past, to someone who now carried the weight of that legacy with quiet resolve. Her hand rested lightly on her lap, the small pendant key that had played such a crucial role in the story tucked securely into her coat pocket. Theodore Hawthorne, ever the calm observer, sat across from us, his eyes scanning the newspaper he had picked up from the train's table. But even his usual detachment seemed to soften. The sense of urgency that had marked our every step was gone. The Brothers of the Four were defeated, their plans shattered, and the treasure was safely hidden away once more. For the first time, in what felt like forever, we were no longer running. The final goodbye. The train's wheels squealed as we slowed, pulling into a small station nestled at the edge of the countryside. The sun was low in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over the rolling hills. It was peaceful here, far removed from the chaos of the city and the shadowy figures that had haunted us in the past weeks. As we stepped off the train, the air was crisp, the scent of freshly cut grass and wildflowers filling the air. For a moment, it was easy to forget that just days ago, we had been fighting for our lives in the underground chamber beneath the ruins of Old Temple Row. But now, it was over. The chase for the treasure had ended. We walked toward a small cottage. At the edge of the station, the place where Evelyn's father had lived before his death. It was a modest house, nestled among towering trees, with ivy creeping up its brick walls. The quietness of the place seemed fitting, almost like a final refuge. Evelyn paused before the door, her hand resting lightly on the old wooden frame. She turned to us, her eyes searching for something, perhaps approval, perhaps a sense of closure. "This is it," she said softly, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I never imagined I would be here at the end of all this. My father, I never understood him. But now I think I do." Theodore gave her a small nod, his gaze softening. "You've done what needed to be done, Evelyn. Your father would have been proud of you. We all would have been." I smiled, though the weight of the moment still lingered in the air. "You've changed, Evelyn. You've become the person you were meant to be. And that's the greatest victory of all." Evelyn's lips curled into a small, bittersweet smile. "I've learned a lot these past few weeks. But the greatest lesson was understanding that some things are worth protecting, not for the treasure they hold, but for the lives they save." She paused, turning toward the house with a deep breath. "My father's legacy ends here. The treasure? It stays hidden, where it belongs." The unwritten future. As we stepped inside the cottage, the atmosphere was warm and inviting. It felt like a peaceful sanctuary, a place where time had slowed. There was an old, well-worn couch by the window, a few scattered books on the table, and family portraits on the walls. Evelyn walked over to one of the portraits, a picture of her father, young and smiling, his arm draped around her mother's shoulders. For a moment, I could see the connection, the sense of family that had been buried beneath layers of secrecy and danger. "He did this for me, didn't he?" Evelyn asked quietly, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of the frame. "He kept the treasure hidden. Not for the gold, not for the power, but for me, so that I would have a life beyond the darkness of the past." Theodore stepped forward, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "Yes, he did. And now you get to live that life. A life free of the chains that bound him." Evelyn nodded, her eyes misting slightly. She turned back to us, her expression softer, now more at peace. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you both. I never could have seen the truth without your help." I placed a hand on her arm, smiling warmly. It was a journey we all shared. A dangerous one, but one that ended the way it should have. And now, we're free. All of us. Theodore gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. The end of one adventure is simply the beginning of another. The peaceful goodbye. As the evening sun began to dip below the horizon, we sat together on the porch of the cottage, the soft glow of lanterns casting a gentle light over the scene. The once overwhelming weight of the world was now lifted from our shoulders. We had come through the fire, and now we were here, together, at the end of an adventure that had tested us, shaped us, and ultimately brought us closer. The treasure, the brotherhood, the chase, it all seemed like a dream now, a distant memory that belonged to another life. "What will you do now, Evelyn?" I asked, my voice filled with curiosity and a sense of respect. Evelyn looked out over the landscape, her gaze focused on the beauty of the world beyond. "I'll live. I'll carry my father's memory, but I'll build my own future. One without secrets, one without fear. I'll make sure the treasure stays hidden where it belongs, and I'll make sure that nothing, no one, can ever take it away." Her voice was steady, strong. She was ready for whatever came next. Theodore leaned back in his chair, his fingers laced together. "I'm glad to hear that, Evelyn. The world is yours now. The choices you make will shape the future. The treasure was never meant to be a burden. It was meant to be the end of an era. You've closed that chapter, and now you can begin a new one." Evelyn smiled, a true smile this time, filled with a sense of peace. "I think I'm ready." We sat there in the stillness of the evening, the sounds of the countryside surrounding us. It felt like the weight of the world had finally been lifted. The Agra treasure, the brotherhood, and the chase for the ultimate power were no longer our concern. The future lay ahead of us, and we were ready to embrace it. A quiet future. The next morning, after a quiet breakfast shared between the three of us, we said our goodbyes. Theodore was already packing his belongings, preparing to leave for new adventures. He would continue his work as an investigator, but I knew he had changed too. The pursuit of knowledge had always been his drive, but now he understood the value of something more, the value of life beyond the chase. "Take care, Evelyn," he said, his voice warm but practical. "You have the strength to shape your future. Don't let anything stop you." I shook Evelyn's hand, my heart filled with gratitude and respect. "I know you'll make the right choices. You've already proven that you're stronger than you realize." And with that, we parted ways, each of us moving on to our own paths, but forever changed by the adventure we had shared. The end of the adventure. The last few days had been a blur, a whirlwind of secrets and betrayals, of treasure and power. But now, as I stood there in the quiet morning light, I realized that the true treasure had never been the jewels or gold we had fought for. It had been the journey, the lessons we had learned along the way, the friends we had made, and the truths we had uncovered. And now, it was time to let go. The end of the adventure had arrived, and with it, a new beginning. "Great work today," Every moment you spend practicing brings you closer to mastering your English listening and speaking skills. Remember, progress comes with patience and consistency. If this story inspired you or helped you in your learning journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Easy English Spark channel for more lessons and stories. Keep listening, keep speaking, and keep believing in your growth. I'll see you in the next video. Take care and keep shining.